The debate arising out of the movie Satluj has brought back memories of the days when Punjab was burning because of ISI trained, armed, and financed Khalistani terrorists, duly aided and abetted by overground workers and sympathizers who were all equally complicit in murdering and terrorizing the common people of this state. Yet the mob had not contended with a fearless man who eventually outmuscled the entire terror industry. A man who would live up to his Sikh legacy, a terminator of terrorists who saved Punjab and India from the deprivations of vicious enemies. But before that, a few samples of what confronted the terminator of terrorists. Khalistani terrorists attacked a passenger bus and killed 38 Hindus and injured 33 on July 6, 1987, near Lalaru village in Mohali district of Punjab. On July 7, that is the next day, 1987, terrorists massacred 34 bus passengers near Daryapur village in Fatehabad in Haryana. A three-term MLA of Congress, Satnam Singh Bajwa, who dared to condemn these attacks, was killed along with four others around him, even though he had police protection. On November 10, 1989, in a grotesque and horrible act, terrorists killed 19 students at Thapar Engineering College, Patiala. On April 3rd, 1990, 36 people were killed and 100 wounded in a bicycle bomb blast targeting a Hindu religious procession in Patala. Policemen had given up their uniforms and moved around in civilian clothes. Judges would recuse themselves from cases involving terror accused. Most of the politicians had either gone underground or followed the directives of the terrorists. Religious places were used by terrorists to assault women and anyone who dared to digress and step out of line. When the Punjab police neutralized Babbar Khalsa's chief, the dreaded Sukhdev Singh Dasuwal, on 9th August 1992, Khalistani terrorists, in retaliation, killed 37 policemen and 63 of their family members within the next 24 hours. And for those obsessed with data, because this is a data driven world, 21,469 people died in the conflict, including 8,009 terrorists, and this is between the period 1981 and 1993. As GBS Sidhu recalls in his wonderful book Khalistan Conspiracy, the fire lit by politicians in Delhi and Punjab was fanned and taken over by ISI. Punjab was being scorched. Now, terrorism in Punjab was not a homegrown phenomena. It was initially an imported phenomena from immigrants to the West who suddenly developed an identity crisis when they migrated to the West. Now, in a sense, they rediscovered religion. They began to fund religious elements in Punjab from the late 1970s. Among the Sikhs in India, the concept of a separate Sikh homeland, that is Khalistan, had practically no grassroots level support. The biggest impetus for Khalistan and terrorism occurred in 1984 in succession. There are different events which happened: Operation Blue Star, the assassination of the Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi, and the anti-Sikh riots which followed. Now, this allowed a fertile land for ISI to present India with a full-scale war. And then what happened? Into this mayhem stepped in KPS Gill. What happened subsequently was a spectacular counter terrorist success. For the first time in history, the security forces of a democracy were able to comprehensively defeat a terrorist movement instead of just containing it. No political compromises were made, no rooted causes were searched for unaddressed. Yet terrorism disappeared from Punjab with a swiftness and permanence that amazed and baffled many people. It is very important for the people to understand the challenges KPS Gill faced and how he overturned them into success. Now, I'm very free that people might want to watch any movie. They're free and they can go ahead and watch any movie. But the problem with such movies is that these movies are basically agenda driven. They want to set a narrative which is not conducive to basically the peace and sanctity in the state and basic understanding of what actually transpired in a certain time frame, in a historical time frame. So we need to understand what is the other side of the story before coming to a conclusion. And this is where it is very important to understand the phenomenal work which KPS Gill did and how he curtailed terrorism in Punjab. And there was a period when suddenly everything appeared that it was just a nightmare and nothing of the sort had happened, which had been plaguing this place for it. It went on for around a decade, I would say. Now he first took over KPS Gill as Director General of Punjab Police in 1981. Now, militancy had engulfed large parts of Punjab. Now, one of the biggest success which he achieved was Operation Black Thunder in 1988, when security forces flushed terrorists from Golden Temple complex through a prolonged siege and precision operations. And this was in complete contrast to Operation Blue Star, where the army had to go in a military-like manner. I mean, that is what they are trained to do, without clear directives. They went in blind, and both sides suffered massive casualties, and which set off the trigger for terrorism. But Operation Black Thunder was a phenomenal success, and we watched it on television. It was a sort of a live operation, and I must say the Indian Special Forces had set the bar very high after that operation. Now, Gill completed his first tenure as Punjab DGP in 1990 before serving as Director General of CRPF before being brought back again as DGP in 1991. Mayank Singh had been elected as the Chief Minister, and he gave KPS Gill the freedom to launch an even more aggressive counter-insurgency campaign. KPS Gill had served for a very long time in the northeastern part of the country, and he was quite aware of the psychology of terrorists, and more so the psychology of terrorists in Punjab. This made him a natural leader of the counter-terrorist effort. As a member of the Jat caste, he used to say himself within the Sikh community, he argued that only a Jat Sikh could defeat another Jat Sikh. It was perhaps this belief that led to his subsequent successes. Through a series of doctrinal innovations, which security analysts and strategic analysts refer to as the Gill Doctrine, KPS Gill molded the Punjab police into India's most effective counter-terrorist force. In 1992, Punjab police launched a massive counter-offensive against the Khalistan movement and erased terrorism in Punjab in less than 2 years. It was a monumental effort. And later on, a theory was developed building a narrative that the Punjab police under Gill had carried out a campaign of state terror. It goes on till date. And perhaps this movie, I've not seen the movie, so I'm not casting any aspersions or making any comments about the movie, but that is what I have read in the newspaper, that it is about state terror. And a number of movies have come out which have portrayed Gill as being the portrayer or an executioner of the state terror. This narrative was further elaborated to project that popular support had somehow abandoned the militants' cause, and their defeat was a historical inevitability without the Punjab police playing any role and KPS Gill playing any constructive role in the elimination of this terrorism. The idea very clearly is to belittle KPS Gill's achievement in eradicating terrorism. ISI and a certain section of the diaspora which is settled in the West and it is Khalistani minded now keep on targeting a cult figure like KPS Gill, and this allows them to basically have that possibility of bringing the genie out of the Khalistani bottle again. KPS Gill's operations against the Khalistani terrorists was a rarity where sheer kinetic counter-terrorism efforts defeated a terrorist movement. It had been assumed till then that security forces could only contain and not defeat terrorism. It was believed that the defeat of terrorism requires the implementation of a political solution that addresses the root cause of militancy and the horses of political solution for all separatist movement courses had been the go-to solution irrespective of the nature of the conflict, the psyche of the people, the circumstances surrounding the proliferation of terrorism. Thankfully, KPS Gill did not believe in this. He was convinced that terrorism was not a mere law and order problem. With ISI's machinations, it had become a military threat, and coercive methods had to be adopted to protect common people and the state from even greater damage. Writing in The Endgame in Punjab 1988-93, KPS Gill wrote, and I'm quoting him, the liberal mind has always remained ambivalent when confronted by the fact that the state, among other things, is a coercive instrument and that it must, from time to time, exercise its option of the use of force, albeit of judicious, narrowly defined, and very specifically targeted use of force, if it is not to be overwhelmed by the greater violence of the enemies of freedom, democracy, and lawful governance. To fail to exercise this legitimate coercive authority is, thus, a measure is not an act of non-violence or of abnegation. It is not a measure of our humanity or civilization. It is rather an intellectual failure and an abdication of responsibility that randomizes violence, alienating it from the institutional constraints of the state and allowing it to pass into the hands of those who exercise it without the discrimination and the limitations of law that govern its employment by the state. In doing this, it makes innocents the victims of criminal violence instead of making criminals the target of its own legitimate and circumspect punitive force. Quote close. So, he's very clear about using coercive force to crush violence to save people and fulfill the responsibility the state basically had given the police force and the administration. In his views, since terrorism was a new way of warfare, rethinking the definition of minimal force had to be done while fighting terrorists armed with military supplies. However, the local population had to be protected from suffering collateral damage to the extent possible. However, if at all these, as the his critics point out, the state terror, he has been basically accused of using state terror, and that he had to basically accuse him of being an executioner sort of thing. If he was that what he's portrayed to be or accused of, then there are far easier ways of using air power than the tough exercise of night domination in terror infested areas like Taran and physically entering the Sarkanda areas, which was very high and very thick grasses. I mean, more than 10 feet, where the terrorists used to hide in the daytime and come out in the night. So the Punjab police entered those Sarkanda areas in a physical way. It was a deadly exercise. It was a dangerous exercise. But these exercises basically impose the fear of law, impose the fear of punitive action in the terrorists. KPS Gill basically also debunked the notion of popular support to terrorist movements, and that this fallacy exaggerated the reality on the ground, which was totally different, he said. In his article, Dubious Things Called Popular Support, he wrote, I'm quoting him again, such assumptions are apparently ratified by the public statements of many leaders and even of the common people and the local media from time to time, and yet they are utterly false. Though this fact can only be confirmed after the terror has been conclusively defeated. He goes on to write, this is precisely what happened in Punjab. In the end 80s, I recall many liberal-headed, muddle-headed, I'm sorry, muddle-headed liberal arguing that we, as in the police, had lost the hearts of the people of Punjab, and so there was little sense in holding on to a piece of land. Thousands, at times hundreds of thousands of people assembled in Bhog ceremonies of killed terrorists, and the media pointed to this intractable evidence of the mass support that the Khalistani enjoyed. But by 1992, when the terrorists were in open flight, there was visible elation in the streets as markets began to remain open late in the evenings. And I recall, KPS Gill writes, the sheer jubilation that marked the first musical night organized by the Punjab police at Taran that was attended by thousands of people rediscovering their freedom. Quote closed. Now, Taran, along with Amritsar, uh, was was the worst terrorist infested areas, and this was the area which KPS Gill had targeted at the very outset. He wanted to go for the head rather than cut off the limbs and then go for the head. KPS Gill explained this misnomer of popular support through a concept. He introduced a concept called societal Stockholm syndrome, he called it, which according to him was a pattern of submission, resignation, acceptance, and eventual justification among the common people that becomes a necessary survival strategy under extreme, lawless, and pervasive threat. Terrorism, he writes, KPS Gill, even by small but well armed and especially externally supported groups, has the capacity to produce in large masses of men a widespread belief in the futility of resistance and a loss of faith in the state and its agencies and their ability to protect life, liberty, and property. These patterns of thought gradually create a denial among the people of their own fear and an increasing justification of the terrorist cause. However outrageous the extremists' demands may be, the logic of these demands for the people, it begins to find sympathetic echoes among the people now who begin to see terrorists as one of their own, the media and the secular or moderate leadership as well. Gradually, this is also translated into an increasing willingness to provide at least non terrorist support to the activities of the terrorists, like feeding, harboring sympathetic buns, dharnas, and protests, the creation and operation of front organizations that take up the cause of the human rights of the arrested terrorists, etc. This is how he defined the societal Stockholm syndrome. KPS Gill was convinced that the first objective of counter-terrorism was to break the collective mental paralysis that terrorist violence imposes upon individuals living in the close proximity of terrorism and terrorist infested areas. To achieve this, he said, and he felt that it was necessary for the police to engage terrorists operationally and physically isolate them from the terrorized. He was the first to realize that the religious element of the Khalistan movement made it closer to being an identity driven rather meant it was closer to being an identity driven struggle than the one that was ideology driven. Now, what is the difference between the two? While the ideologically motivated terrorists could be forced to negotiate, brought to the negotiating table through debates and deliberations, the identity driven terrorists created a psychological barrier between themselves and the members of the other, as they call the other groups. That is how they differentiate people, us versus them. Overcoming this barrier by non coercive means was near impossible, particularly when the differences between the terrorists and the others was clearly visible in Punjab. The Punjab police and KPS Gill's kinetic methods were based on the premise that depletion of terrorist resources had to be raised to an unsustainable level for the terrorists. Now, this meant that the police had to enter into a war of attrition. This in turn provided a mechanism by which the rate of terrorist elimination could be raised to an extent where the more terrorists were neutralized rather than their recruitment was happening. Now, it also involved the repression of terrorists along with their active supporters, which was based again on good intelligence. Since the vast majority of the non combatant population was left unaffected by the security forces and their action, sympathy for the terrorists did not automatically increase. Now, this is how he went after the terrorists and got popular support for neutralizing these terrorists. KPS Gill's methods were his emphasis was on quality local intelligence, and which was then combined with innovative measures like night domination of terrorist infested areas. Now, this led to a massive upsurge in neutralization of terrorists that the government of Mayank Singh in Punjab, credit must be given to Mayank Singh also, who stood by Gill like a rock, and this provided Gill's actions with the political legitimacy whose absence would not have resulted in such an effective action by the Punjab police. Now, neutralization of terrorists now led to a boosting of the morale of the security forces. More intelligence started to flow in. People started to come up against the terrorists and provide intelligence to the people. Now, these were not the routine informers. These were not the terrorists who were breaking away from the original group. It was the common people who were coming up and giving information to the Punjab police. In Taran, which was the area of highest terrorist activity, an elaborate system of informers was also prepared. This allowed the police to identify the harborers of these terrorists, and public identification of these harborers and sympathizers of the terrorist movement it was led to an assurance of the fact that the people stopped fearing these terrorist sympathizers who were otherwise flexing their muscles at every given opportunity. In my opinion, the only free hand report given to KPS Gill and the Punjab police was not the random neutralization of terrorists through brutal use of force and use of coercion. On the contrary, the free hand was basically freeing the Punjab police from the shackles of constant political interference. While no one can deny the occasional high-handedness which does occur when the security forces are acting in a warlike situation, and trust me, Punjab was in a warlike situation in that period, the allegations of mass undocumented murders are exaggerated. Shekhar Gupta, who I believe was the editor of the Indian Express in those days, he had a bird's eye view of the situation in Punjab through his reporters and his personal networking and journalism. He very recently in a video recalled that how Jaswant Singh Khalra, who is in the center of storm for this movie, he had extrapolated data from three crematoriums in Punjab of terrorist infested areas to arrive at an undocumented figure of mass disappearance of 25,000 people. And Shekhar Gupta goes on to say that out of the 2,000 odd authentic numbers given by Khalra and his team to the NHRC identified 100 deaths as odd and suspicious also because these people had died in police custody. While even one custodial death, I mean, is one, or even disappearance is one too many in a civil society and condemnable, the fact remains, and we need to concede this fact and agree to fact that KPS Gill had entered into a deep pit of very poisonous snakes to save the majority of innocent civilians from what then seemed like a certain and confirmed obliteration. Now, there are times when nations and civilizations have to pay a price to remain intact. That is the hard realism of life. And nations, my friends, never, and the nations which prosper basically, they never denigrate those who stand at the borders with a gun in their hand so that the rest of us can sleep peacefully. Thank you.